And today I'm going to teach you how to make this German chocolate cake. So the ingredients that we're going to be using for the German chocolate cake are a half a cup of water, 1 bar of sweet cooking chocolate, 1 cup of butter or margarine, 2 cups of sugar, 4 eggs, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 2½ cups of cake flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of salt, and 1 cup of buttermilk. You don't have to use cake flour if you don't have it or you don't know what it is. You can use all-purpose flour. The difference between the two is just that cake flour is more fine, and so if you just sift all-purpose flour a couple of times, it will work the same. And if you don't have a sifter, you can just use a wire whisk and it will do the same thing. Right, now we're going to start mixing the cake. We're going to take the half a cup of water that we have in this measuring cup, and I'm going to put it in the microwave and heat it up until it's boiling. Probably do it for 1.5 to 2 minutes, or until the water is nice and bubbly. Okay, we're going to take our 4 eggs, and we need to separate the egg whites from the yolk. So, I'm going to crack the egg. And you just, to separate the egg white from the yolk, you just put the yolk, go from one shell to the other shell until all the egg white is out. Now we're going to save the egg whites because we're going to add them later into the cake mix. We're going to start with mixing the butter and the sugar together until it's light and fluffy, and then we're going to add the egg yolks one at a time. So we're going to take the sugar, and this is 2 cups of sugar, but if you're at high altitudes, just take out 2 tablespoons of that. We're going to take our electric mixer. We're going to mix these until they're light and fluffy. Here we have 1 cup of butter and 2 cups of sugar. Now that we have the butter and the sugar mixed up, and so it's light and fluffy, we're just going to add the egg yolks one at a time. The buttermilk, the vanilla, and the rest of the dry ingredients. But in my case, I don't have buttermilk, so we're going to make a substitute for it. And what you need is just regular milk and vinegar. We're going to take our measuring cup, we're going to put in 2 teaspoons of vinegar. The recipe calls for 1 cup of buttermilk, but for high altitudes, they say to do 1 1/4. With the vinegar in there, we're just going to add the rest until it's 1 1/4 cups. Okay. Alright, now that we have our buttermilk made, we're going to add the flour, the salt, and the baking soda alternately with the milk. Now we're going to put the flour in. The recipe calls for 2½ cups, but for high altitudes, we're only going to use 2 1/4 cups. So we're going to dump that in, and then we're going to pour in a little bit of the buttermilk. We're going to mix it up. Now we're going to add the baking soda, and the recipe calls for 1 teaspoon. So get that. Put that in, and then we're going to put a little bit more of the buttermilk and mix it up again. And again, we're going to scrape the sides to make sure everything gets mixed in. Okay, now I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Now we're going to add the last ingredient, the salt. The recipe calls for 1/2 teaspoon of salt, so we're going to put that in right now. Okay, I've added a half a teaspoon of salt and the rest of the buttermilk. Now I'm going to finish mixing it up. Always remember to scrape the sides because you don't want to miss any of the good stuff. Now that we have the cake all mixed up and it's nice and smooth, we're going to do the egg whites. So let me get them out of the fridge. dump them in a bowl. We're going to mix them with the wire whisks until the egg whites are nice and fluffy and stiff. The egg whites are getting nice and fluffy, but they're not quite done. We need a little more time. If you look at these egg whites, they're not quite stiff. They're still kind of runny, so we need to mix it a little more. I've mixed the egg whites for about 2 to 3 minutes, and if you look at them now, they're nice and stiff and they make little peaks, and that shows that they're ready to put into the cake batter. We're going to get the cake batter. We're going to really gently put the egg whites into the batter. So now the egg whites are in that cake batter. We're going to gently fold the egg whites into the cake batter. Comes with regular beaters or wire whisks, and for the cake batter we're going to be using the regular beaters because it'll be easier to handle with all the flour. So here we have the eggs, butter, and the sugar all mixed together. Now we're going to add the chocolate mixture to this. And then we're going to mix it with the mixer on a low speed. We're going to get all the chocolate out because we don't want to waste any of it. Now we're going to mix this on a low speed with the mixer. Just scrape the sides a little bit so everything can get mixed in evenly. Just mix it one more time. Okay, looks good. Now we're ready for the next step. We're going to start by preheating the oven to 350 degrees. You want to make sure that your oven is completely heated before you will put the cake in. So we're finished turning on the oven, and now we're going to start with the pans. For this cake I'm going to be using 2 9-inch round pans. You can also use 3 8-inch round pans or 2 square 8-inch by 8-inch by 2 pans or 2 square 9-inch pans. And what we're going to be doing is putting some wax paper on the bottom of each pan. That way the cake will slide right out and it will look really nice. So we're going to start by putting the pan on the wax paper and tracing the bottom of the wax paper. It's very important that you always grease your pans before you put the batter in, or when you try and take the cake out, it won't come out at all. It'll just fall apart. See, it makes a nice circle, and you can just follow the pattern and cut it right out. Now let's do the other pan. I'm using wax paper and grease, or what I'm going to be using is Crisco to grease the pans. It's important to use both because even if you grease the bottom of the pan, the cake will sometimes still stick, and then it won't look good when you're icing the cake. So what I do is I just get a little plastic bag and get a little bit of Crisco and then just wipe the sides of the pan. You don't need a really thick layer of Crisco or grease, just a little thin layer will work fine. Now we're going to put the wax paper on the bottom of each pan. So there you go, there's the wax paper. So those are all ready for the cake batter, so we'll just set those aside. And now we're ready to mix our cake. When the cakes are finished, you always want to make sure that you take them out of the pans right away while they're still hot, or they'll stick to the pan. And if you look at the cake on the side, it started to separate. That's a good sign also to show that they're done. Now that the cake is done, we're going to take them out of the pan. I'm going to run the knife along the side of the pan to separate the cake from the pan so it'll come out easy. I'm going to get a plate, put it upside down on the cake pan, and just flip it upside down. And lift up the cake pan. Looks like it came out really good. And the wax paper is still on the cake, so I'm just going to carefully peel that off. Now you don't want to leave the cakes on the plate because they will get soggy and mushy and they won't frost well. So you want to immediately put them onto cooling racks, some kind of cooling rack that will circulate the air underneath and above. Now that the cake's in the oven, we're going to start with the icing. For the ingredients, we have 2 cups of sugar, half a cup of cornstarch, 2 2/3 cups of coconut, 2 cups of chopped nuts, and 1 stick of margarine, and evaporated milk. And I'm going to measure this out so that it is 2 cups. Okay, with the nuts, you can use walnuts or pecans. Pecans will have a sweeter flavor and walnuts will have a more tangy flavor. Today we're going to be using walnuts. We're going to start by putting the cornstarch, the sugar, and the evaporated milk together. Measure out the evaporated milk to be 2 cups. You want to make sure that you put this in a microwave-safe bowl because we're going to be microwaving this icing. Make sure that you mix it really good and you get all the lumps of the cornstarch out. You can use a wire whisk, it doesn't matter how you want to do it. Now that you have the mixture nice and smooth, we're going to put it in the microwave and cook it for 1 minute. You have to make sure that your cakes are completely cool before you start icing them, or the ice will melt and run off the sides and it won't look very good. Okay, we've let the cake and the icing cool, and now we're ready to frost the cake. So first we're going to take one of the layers and put it on the dish that you want to serve it on, and I'm going to frost that. And you want to make sure the icing, you'll know when it's ready is when it's nice and thick and creamy. You just spread it on. I'm putting the icing in between the layers because it kind of holds the layers together and it makes it taste really good because there's a layer of icing in between. Alright, now that's ready. We're going to put on the last layer. I think I'm going to put it upside down. Just frost the rest of your cake. To frost the sides of the cake, you just take the icing and rub it along the sides and try to get a nice even layer. And that's how you make a German chocolate cake.